Here we go. Good morning. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining in. I'm here today talking to Brian, a healthcare professional from Florida, and we were going to touch on the topic of secondary health issues relating to the outbreak. I think the fact that a lot of elective surgeries are being postponed because of the strain on hospitals. How would you characterize the problem, Brian?
Basically, every hospital system I know of, especially in my area, all elective surgeries have been canceled. Even elective diagnostic procedures such as colonoscopies and which is like the scope that goes up and looks for stuff, and what they call an EGD, which is a scope that goes the other way down the mouth into the stomach to look for things. Those different procedures are diagnostic procedures that are used for people that are not necessarily ill, but looking for polyps or possible cancers or things like that, that if left untreated can cause serious health issues in the future. And a lot of people think of like elective surgeries as somebody going to get a tummy tuck or a breast augmentation or something like that. It's not that. My neighbor next door was involved in a serious traffic accident a couple years ago, hit by a motorcycle, or hit on her motorcycle by a car, and has had to have a knee replaced, and now requires back surgery. And they've said, sorry, we're not able to give you your back surgery for another month and a half at least at this point.
At least, and that's the thing. We assume, as you said, that it's elective surgeries are frivolous surgeries, and clearly they're not. These are just not immediate life or death scenarios, but they can still lead to life and death scenarios, because a lot of those investigative procedures that would obtain an early diagnosis of cancer, those aren't going to be happening now and for the foreseeable future. So people whose lives could have been saved, perhaps with an early operation for cancer after detecting it through a colonoscopy, an elective surgery colonoscopy, that's not going to be happening. So we'll see a lot more of untreatable, advanced cancer cases down the track as a consequence of cancer detection surgeries not being able to happen at this stage because they're elective procedures and they have to be delayed as a consequence of the coronavirus outbreak. So yes, that's just something for us all to think about. The additional layers of hardship attached to this outbreak and also the poor management of this outbreak. I see a lot of calls online for there to be sometimes bipartisan support of the president. And obviously I disregard those, because I can understand why people want the president to be doing the right thing. But at the same time, it takes sustained public pressure to make the president do the bare minimum of action for the American people, as well as not sabotaging efforts that were already created to protect people. So I'm just thinking about the pandemic handbook that the Obama administration left behind that they just neglected to look at or follow. So yes, but returning to your point, Brian, that about people such as your neighbor who are left in significant pain because their knee replacement surgeries or back surgeries are postponed. You work with those kind of clients or patients on a daily basis. What type of reactions are you seeing? Are you ever being the person who has to break it to people that their surgeries are postponed, or are you hearing anything from the coalface?
Well, I'm hearing it from other people because I work in the ICU setting. We typically don't see those outpatient procedures or elective procedures come to us unless something adverse happened during the procedure, which is few and far between, thankfully, most of the time. But what I'm like, my neighbor, she has been in contact with the hospital she was supposed to have the surgery at since all this has started. And 3 different times they've said, oh, we're going to do it this date. And then they call her back and they're like, oh, no, we're pushing it back another week. And now it's pushed back to the middle of next month at the earliest. And she was supposed to have had the surgery today, technically, was her original scheduled surgery date.
So that's an emotional roller coaster for her of continual set your mind to having a surgery and then it's postponed. Organize your life to have a surgery and it's postponed again.
She's gone through and had all the testing done, all of the imaging, all of the blood work. At this point, the blood work won't even be good. She'll have to have blood work redrawn because it has to be done within a certain time frame prior to having the surgery done.
Yeah.
They can't go blood work
she's already had done will be invalid and she'll have to redo all those tests. These are just layers of upon layers of hardship. Now, are you hearing much from people who, I think Florida's just been put into shutdown. Has Governor DeSantis just ordered a shutdown for the state of Florida? Is my understanding correct on that?
He has ordered it's not a complete shutdown. The shutdown we're looking for, and actually I one of the nurses I work with started a petition, and I've shared it to here and to Facebook.
Sorry, you keep talking, Brian. I've got to stop my children from interrupting my husband who's on a work call. Hang on. Okay.
No problem.
Sorry. I will take them away.
But my what I was saying, I lost my train of thought. But what I was talking about was what was I talking about? I forgot what I was saying and lighten up. I'm sorry. Hello, Ken Davu. How are you?
Thanks, Brian.
No problem. I lost my train of thought. I have my tablet sitting on top of my laptop so I can see the comments as well, too, as people are going. But I totally forgot. Yeah, routine care has been interrupted. And another thing that we've noticed specifically at my hospital, because my hospital is a smaller hospital, it's only a couple hundred bed hospital, is that we've noticed the census overall for our hospital is low. Where it's not low is in the ICU and the progressive units, where we're seeing these possible COVID cases. People are coming in with the shortness of breath, the fevers, all the symptoms, signs and symptoms of COVID infection. Whereas the rest of the hospital, the medical surgical floors are having a lower amount of census, but those medical surgical floors typically won't be able to take care of the sickest of the sick COVID patients. Mm-hmm. But their patients are typically your outpatient surgeries or your overnight surgeries, because some surgeries are a little bit more intense and they do require a day or two, even if they're elective surgeries, a day or two of observation after the fact.
I have remembered what it was we were talking about before I had to leave to marshal the children around, and that was what the extent of the shutdown is. You were clarifying for me.
Oh, yes, the shutdown. Basically, I mean, it is not a full-on shutdown like what we want. I was saying my friend had started a petition to Ron DeSantis to shut down everything, shut down incoming flights, outgoing flights, that type of stuff. All that stuff is still going on. People are still flying into the state. People are still flying out of the state. People are still free to move around. What they're shutting down is more what they're considering non-essential businesses. Even my mother, who is a bookkeeper, works for a company that is considered an essential business because they do work for the phone company. She's a bookkeeper there. She does their payroll and stuff like that, and their billables and payables and all that kind of stuff. So, I mean, she still has to go to work. She's in an environment that's not very, not a lot of people in the office. There's only 3 to 4 people in the office at any given time, and she's on the first floor by herself. Everybody else is upstairs.
Okay, so it's relatively easy for that company to practice social distancing, at least then.
Yes, it is. It's very easy for them, and she said she's glad about that, which I'm glad about that too, because I mean, I'd hate for her to come in contact with somebody, but literally, they might get 3 people that come into their office on any given day that aren't employees, and 2 of them are UPS and USPS.
Okay. A lot of deliveries still happening. One thing I'm going to ask, actually, I'm going to look this up myself, because I think WHO has changed its directives perhaps today to say, oh no, because I'm not up to date with whether or not wearing masks is recommended, because before the CDC was saying don't wear masks unless you're sick. That's my understanding. But I know there's a push to urge the CDC to change their guidelines, because there's more and more evidence coming to the forefront that suggests the virus is likely airborne, i.e. contained in droplets small enough to remain in the air just from people breathing, let alone being distributed with force when someone speaks or coughs or sneezes. So I think homemade masks are going to be a good thing to wear, and I've got the New York Times has got not a recipe, a pattern for making before people leave the house. It's much more of an Asian cultural thing to wear masks, but I'm hoping that it'll get broader adoption. Can you hear my children? I can hear them quite readily, but can you hear them?
We can hear them,
as
but
well
it's
in the
not,
background, Brian?
It's just kind of background noise.
Can you hear
it's not
the
distracting.
sound of children screaming at all? I'm just wondering if it's if the broadcast can hear.
You yourself are breaking up a little bit on my end.
It's a bit distant. Okay, good. Guys, my broadcast, whatever. Okay, but it doesn't involve standing up.
One of the things that I've been looking at is the fact
that's
that
probably everyone then probably an internet viability issue. A lot of people staying from home, I think, more demands bandwidth and casting position. I've been better at active position in the living room to my husband.
Dav, you are breaking up. I don't know if you can hear me very well. Can anybody else hear me?
Were you saying, Brian?
I was saying that you're breaking up pretty badly.
Yep.
I don't know if other people can hear me though. Oh, Tater Salad, you can still hear me. Okay, it's just Dav that is kind of breaking up. Okay. Well, one thing, maybe Dav's connection will get a little bit better. One thing I was saying is, one thing I was looking into was there is the some studies that are saying that the virus itself can be aerosolized to the point where it becomes a suspension in the air. So it's becoming more airborne. Oh, am I still here and Dav is gone? Okay, I guess I've hijacked her her broadcast. Oh, you're still here. Okay. All right. But what I was saying is,
I'm still here. I'm just listening.
One thing that I have found is that these particles can be aerosolized to the point where they become a suspension. The virus itself has a size of 0.125 microns. The masks that we have been trying to preserve and reuse this whole time are N95 masks, which block out particles as small as 0.3 microns. If you do the math, two virus particles side by side are small enough to still fit through that 0.3 micron hole. But that's only if they're totally dry and there's no moisture left on them. One of the things that I was speaking to my safety director about at work is the fact that we are saving and reusing these masks. So there are droplets suspended in the air and they get on the mask. We put the mask away, we take it back, and then we're reusing it. And now the droplet itself has dried, but the virus is still there, and now you can breathe that virus through the filter because that filter is not small enough to filter out the actual virus particles. And I said that's one way that a lot of these healthcare workers who have been using these masks exclusively might have possibly been getting sick through no fault of their own. They're just following what their company, what their healthcare system is telling them to do, but they are putting themselves at risk by doing this.
Yeah. I don't know how. Can you hear me?
Yes, you're coming through much better now.
Oh, good. So the internet's having a happy moment from my end.
Yes.
Yes. So maybe Candavu is saying maybe give the used mask more time to let the virus die. But I think the research is still out on that question of how long it takes the virus to die, because they've found some viral particles 17 days after exposure from infected patients on cruise ships.
On hard surfaces, they are finding that they're living longer. On a mask, which is softer surface, I believe the time is less, but it's still, you're talking hours, possibly a day or two. I mean, that's not a risk that anybody should have to take.
Correct. It's very unfortunate, and I wonder if there's I doubt there's any homemade improvements that could be conducted to an N95 mask. And there was a case of a nurse, not in Michigan, was it Minnesota? There was a nurse who quit her job because she brought an N95 mask that she'd purchased herself into work, and she was told she couldn't wear that on her shift. And so she resigned her job. And there's been a viral video circulating of her tearful testimony to that effect, that she'd just given up her job, which is a scary thing to do in a time of great economic collapse. But hopefully she'll find another job somewhere else as a nurse, given the conditions.
There are plenty of nursing jobs, trust me.
Yeah. Yes.
New York is desperate for nurses. I've heard reports of one nurse taking care of as many as 15 patients because they're that short right now. Nursing agency staffing companies are offering insane benefits and bonuses and rates of pay for people to up and go up there to help. And people are doing it. The nurses are leaving their current positions in places that aren't as hard hit to go up there and help. I know of a couple of nurses I work with that are considering doing it just because they feel that passionate about it. They're willing to go up there and help. They're in a situation, they don't have children, they're not married, they don't have anything tying them down to where they have to stay here. So they're willing to do that.
Yes, it's very very noble and interesting, because we're in a more feminist era, and this is effectively a war where there is more voluntary service, although women have always served in different capacities during wartime, but this is an obvious one where it's there's a lot of women in nursing professions where you can see a lot of women stepping up to put themselves and their bodies in harm's way to serve others. My daughter's kicking my butt, literally. Pumpkin, you can have lunch soon, but I know you just ate something. It's not lunchtime yet. No, it's another 20 minutes to lunchtime. See you soon.
I know women have always stepped up during times of war, working in factories and nursing, and my great aunt was a wasp during the war, flying planes back and forth to different places. So, yeah.
That's awesome. My kids have been watching a little bit about Amelia Earhart, and the more I think about it, the more that accounts for some cultural differences I see between Australia and the US. So many women in the US are really proud of their accomplishments and their participation in the workforce and their achievements. It's a big deal. And I think in Australia, there's not as much cultural attachment to that concept. So that's great that so women have so visibly been, yes, you can, but in Mummy's room. Not in that room, darling. Are you getting something? Okay. Yes. But anyway, I'm interested to learn about that. My relatives have been telling me, in case we do manage to move to the US, my husband's literally working for the US at the moment. He's just doing the job remotely. But we should learn about American history and American states, etc. And I've got a little bit of a head start. So MO means Missouri. Is that what MO stands for as an American state?
Missouri is, I think MO is Montana.
Oh, Montana.
I'd have to look it up.
Yeah.
I'd have to look it up. I can't remember what Missouri is.
I'll look
it up. I know MI is Mississippi.
They're agreeing
with you.
What is
Missouri?
Missouri's. Okay, let's look it up. Missouri.
All right. I don't know who's saying yes to what. I don't know.
Yeah, you got to clarify. Missouri. Oops. MO. Oh, yeah, Missouri's MO.
Oh, Missouri is MO. Okay. So what is Montana then?
Let's find out what Montana. Maybe
MP is Montana? All right. See, I don't even know my state abbreviations. That's horrible. I'm gonna have to attend
remedial
with my kids tomorrow.
Do they do home learning at the moment as well?
Yes, they are doing home learning at the moment. My wife is incorporating a little bit of culinary into our home learning, and my 11-year-old daughter, all of a sudden, the last 2 days, decided she likes to cook. So
awesome.
She made us bacon potato soup and quesadillas for dinner.
That's really good. Wow. Bacon and what soup? Bacon potato soup. That sounds good.
Yeah, it was very good. Delicious.
Okay, wow. I'm going to have to try and introduce my 5-year-old to cooking, just because I think if she's a sous chef, she might stop refusing so many different foods if she's more involved in it.
Well, 2 days ago, I could have never gotten her to try this soup if my wife had made it or myself. But because she made it, she ate it, she loved it.
Emotional investment.
Yeah,
I'm trying to use that principle in a different manifestation for home learning, in that I let my daughter teach me things, or I try and alternate. So I do a flashcard, she does a flashcard, because if she's participating in the testing process of like, let's test each other, then she seems to cope a little better. This is all approaching it through a Freudian sort of framing as don't unbalance the ego too much, because all improvement is a challenge to the ego's conviction that you're fine as you are, that contributes to psychological stability. So all learning is an invitation to take on a degree of ego destabilizing for the trade-off of going, oh, well, I learned something, I'm improved, I'm better, because that's food for your ego. If you're going to starve your ego of stability, you have to offer it an alternate snack. And that's just how I try to conceptualize it to myself, to offer my children a trade-off of, okay, accept that you're imperfect and you need to know more, which I think is one of the things that turns children off school, that implication that you're not good enough as you are, learn more. We have to get them so comfortable with that of, this is not a challenge to saying you're good enough as you are, this is just the opportunity to gain. And not everybody can tap into that, because for a lot of people, they resentfully understand schooling as being just a categorization process that's going to find them wanting. And that's why it's always the involvement of caring mentors that really facilitates learning, because when you have someone who seems to say, I believe in you, I believe that you will be made more by this, that you will be actualizing your potential through learning something. And anyway, that's just a little tangent on my educational philosophy. But let's go back to the government of America. And because my thrust of broadcasting at the moment is still to say, if we raise awareness of what steps still need to be done and who to protect, who to escalate protections for, because I think a lot more needs to be done and can be done to protect frontline healthcare workers. And people need to understand. This point seems to be often underemphasized in American media, that testing is not just to identify that people are sick with the coronavirus. It's to find the people who aren't sick, to isolate the asymptomatic carriers, the people who don't appear to be sick but who are spreading the disease. And I watch just extracts of Morning Joe, and they complain about testing so much. I've seen so many times them say testing. And I always want them to explain more about the need for that. The big picture is that testing enables us to identify the carriers and isolate those, to get more specific with our isolation practices, which going forwards would enable us to relax some of those shutdown measures. So yes, I set as a goal for myself to try and remedy any points that I think are being under-addressed in the media. Do you have any points that are bothering you, Brian, if you engage with mainstream media at all, that you think they should be touching on, or they forget that it's not just about protecting healthcare workers, but about stopping healthcare workers from being literal vectors of transmission? If we don't give you the equipment you need, then it's more likely you could be infected and not just fall sick, but become an asymptomatic carrier yourselves, with this great ability to then transmit the virus to vulnerable patients already in the hospital.
Well, here's one thing that I've thought, and we saw this from the data from South Korea, who all the asymptomatic carriers were. They were the 20 to 30-year-olds that aren't necessarily getting sick, but they're spreading it. And when they found this out, they squashed it, and their infection rates have plateaued. They're doing very well. If we were to take that same approach and test everybody, and I think, honestly, routine testing of healthcare workers. We're going to test each healthcare worker once a week. You come in, you get a swab, because it takes a week almost for symptoms to show. If I go in and I'm sick and say I'm actually asymptomatic, I don't have any, maybe I feel a little bit off, but it's nothing more than, I think I'm just tired. I haven't slept well in the last couple of shifts. And I'm spreading it around to non-COVID patients that I am taking care of, who then go home after their illness is completed, and now they're coming back with COVID, and they're like, well, where did they get it? They could have gotten it from myself or another healthcare worker that might have been infected. That's why I think that healthcare workers should be routinely tested, because of our close contact with these patients.
Yes, exactly. The healthcare workers can so easily be transformed into unwitting transmitters of the virus, and that's the healthcare scenario you really want to avoid, and it's not adequately being avoided. You want to minimize that risk, and all of the deficiencies in the provision of healthcare equipment, multiplying that risk factor around the US. So we're learning more that the US is still having personal protective supplies sent overseas or purchased by overseas buyers and sent overseas. So the federal government could act rapidly to put an end to that practice. We're seeing, again, negative consequences associated with America's over-reliance on the private sector, which is, I think, the product of years of attempted indoctrination by Ayn Rand acolytes, people who say to themselves, free market solves everything, government is unnecessary. We're really suffering so much from the infection rates of libertarian style thinking that says free market. We need the federal government to have said no taking protective equipment overseas, no taking ventilators overseas. And there's a story that's just broken about the Trump administration neglecting to renew a contract for maintenance of the strategic stockpile, that those supplies of ventilators that the government held in reserve. So a lot of them that have been distributed are broken because the Trump administration allowed a contract to lapse. So I can bring up that story so people can see. While I'm looking for it, though, I will just briefly share this news update from NPR that says the CDC is reconsidering its advice about whether masks could offer a benefit in slowing the spread. So there's that. The CDC director on Monday said that the agency is taking another look at the data around mask use by the general public. Okay, and what did I say I was going to do? Get the news story, that's breaking story relating to, how am I going to find it? I will find it because I can use the search Twitter function. Okay. His name begins with Adam. Adam Server, that's the name of the journalist. Okay. Maybe I've misspelled his name. All right, I found it, which means I can share this story. Okay, good. All right, so we get away from that, and we add Twitter. So we can look at this story together. I think it's a Washington Post story. Oh, no, it's a New York Times story, which I won't be able to access online, but we can see the screenshot. So this is a crazy story about why so much of the US ventilator stockpile is unusable. Federal officials have neglected to mention that an additional 2,109 life-saving devices are unavailable after the contract to maintain the government stockpile lapsed late last summer, and a contracting dispute meant that a new firm did not begin its work until late January. So that is why that appears to be why some of the ventilators sent out have not been operational. So just to add that to our understanding of significant lapses in competence by the federal government, even as people ask us not to draw attention to these lapses because Trump wants to be a war president that everybody falls in behind to get a kind of rally around the flag effect. But I think the levels of incompetence are so significant that people can't resist it. Well, at least a number of independents aren't going to be able to resist drawing that conclusion that the level of incompetence is ongoing and significant and almost malevolent in its degree. What's your on-the-ground report from that, Brian? Are any people in Florida, I remember you had a colleague who was pro-Trump. Are they making any noises to you that suggest they're reconsidering their uncritical devotion to the current occupant of the Oval Office?
No. This person still stands by Trump. I don't know why. Like I said, I've talked to this person multiple times. I don't know. I don't know what it takes to get through to some of these people. And somebody else, another person that I work with too, who I know was very pro-Trump, said something to me, and I made a snarky comment back about the fact that this whole response would have been better had we had a president that knew what he was doing and actually cared about people. And that shut this person down, and they were just like, oh, well, okay, yeah. And then they walked away, and that was it.
That's still so promising. That's like the beginning of a thought process. Maybe they'll just go watch Fox News some more, but
well, and everything they were spouting back to me was Fox News rhetoric. Like everything they had to say was just something that you would hear Hannity say, or one of the other. Hannity's the only one I know of. He's the only name I know because I refuse to actually watch Fox News.
Yeah. Understandable.
But, yeah. But I hear this person talking, and I hear like Hannity's voice because I've heard his voice. Yeah. And I hear him talking when they're saying, and it's like you are so brainwashed by listening to Fox for the past 20 years that I don't know that you're even reachable at this point.
Yeah,
and I don't know what to say.
There must be some independence, because if you think about the psychological need of having done something like vote for Trump because you inadequately researched who he was or inadequately understood the kind of bankrupt, incompetent liar that he was. So if you made that initial mistake, the process that psychologists call accommodation, where you just only engage with evidence that supports your decision that you've already made. So you make a decision, then the way you interpret the world always has to reflect well on that decision you made. You can't engage with evidence that shows you made a wrong decision. And it's a self-protective psychological mechanism. So those people almost are dependent on parroting Hannity for their own psychological self-preservation, because how bad would they feel about themselves if they began the process of admitting that Trump isn't that great? Which is why I think maybe we need to work on our olive branches a little. Like when you just got to make that non-loaded statement of, it would be great to have a president who cared about people and who knew what he was doing. That wasn't a directly critical of them. Oh, you terrible person, you fascist, you voted for modern day Hitler. You just said, wouldn't it be great to have someone who cared? So I think that's a great example for us to listen to and adopt, because that response that you got of just them being at a loss and maybe going away and thinking a bit more, just even a moment of reflection is not a guarantee of sunlight entering the premises, but it's an opportunity for sunlight to enter the premises. To be at a loss for words, even for a moment, is just allowing cogs to turn. So we're trying to create a safe space for those people to reconsider their positions. And a lot of them won't. I mean, even in the ruins of Germany being liberated from the Nazis by Russia and American forces, a lot of people still supported Hitler even then. That was the conclusion of a book called They Thought They Were Free. Like, the American soldiers marched German suburbanites through some of the camps to say, look at what you're living next to. How could you not know that this atrocity was happening in your neighborhood? And the expressions in the photographs that the American soldiers took were very shocked. Like, oh no, I'm walking past piles of emaciated corpses. So they may have hidden from themselves the details of it, but they did support someone who was promising to harm others. And that is the type of promise that Trump supporters have accepted as a to be welcomed cost of their goal, which they think is to improve things for people by putting America first. And so we're learning, and they're learning. We kind of already knew that when you do that whole Germany first, America first rhetoric, that it's usually just an invitation for really nasty people to just abuse others and elevate themselves on the back of that. And to pursue corruption, because they know they have this pass of engaging this extreme emotional reaction from people and disengaging logic. So the emotion is, yes, everything that Fox has told you about the world is true. We're validating your worldview. We're keeping out the brown people. Other people were unwilling to do that, but we're willing to do it, to say the things that you know other people won't admit to tell it like it is, to validate your idea that America's too helpful to the rest of the world and it needs to just put itself first. America, in surrendering some of its global positions for monitoring health in other countries and preventing pandemics, all of those pandemic response units that Trump defunded and shut down, they helped America. And the loss of life from that is going to be extensive, potentially in the millions, let alone this 200,000 that they say is going to be the best case scenario. So what's my
point? Yes. Based on the percentages that are out there, we went up in 3 days from 1.7% to about 2.2% deaths here in the U.S. That's over a 3-day period, based on the latest numbers from Johns Hopkins, which is the site that I follow the most for updated numbers. If you take 2% of the population of 300 million people, that's a lot more than 200,000 people. Not to say that everybody's going to get infected. There will still be some people that have a
70% infection rate still.
Yeah.
2% of that is
2% of that of the 330 million people here in this country. That's still death in the numbers of millions. You're talking a death scale on the scale of the Holocaust.
Yes.
From a pandemic that was that was mismanaged.
Yes. Yes. And mismanaged to such an extent that I'm guessing that Trump is gambling on his ability to cause the death of more blue state voters than red state voters, which is just really next level Republican voter suppression. So I don't just want to hold Trump to account for this. I want to hold Republican senators for account for letting Trump perpetuate his approach to problems, which is to try and bribe and blackmail his way out of them, rather than approach any problem in an actual responsible fashion. So we have a criminal whose energies are all marshaled around self-preservation. So he might do some things, but they're about preserving optics. They're not really about broad, whole of nation responses to solve this problem. So he still hasn't instituted a national lockdown. He appears to still be taking inadequate measures to order goods, to invoke that Defense Production Act to the extent that it needs to be invoked, to organize supplies for Americans who need it, and then to fairly and reasonably distribute the resources. So there was a comment from a White House insider that said, yes, Trump's very aware of Florida and its significance to his re-election prospects, and that's why he's paying careful attention to requests from the Florida governor. So that was shocking some people on Twitter because it amounts to an admission that Trump is dispersing resources in a manner which relates to his re-election prospects, rather than to the needs, the proportionate needs of the American people.
Yeah, we are the latest data that I've spoken with doctors that I work with. The latest data they're seeing is that we are going to hit our peak in the middle of next month here in Florida, and that's best case scenario at this point. Yes. Places like New York that are in their peak are the places that need the supplies yesterday.
Yes.
And like you said, Trump is just he's giving these supplies to his red states, yes. I guess, hoping to keep his voters alive so that they'll vote in November. Yes. Which that is one of the worst possible things a human, I think, could ever do. Honestly, it's sickening to me as a healthcare professional, as a nurse, to think that somebody has that mindset that they're willing to put the lives of others in jeopardy in that way for that much personal gain. Yes. It's sickening. It really is.
And I'm going to return to Fox News, because I think Fox News has to a degree been preparing red voters in America for that kind of behavior, and to even celebrate it, because they've been dehumanizing blue voters and blue states for a long time. So the rhetoric that I see on the internet from people who support Trump has for a long time been referring to Democratic voters as demon rats, very dehumanizing language, the type of language you see that precedes genocides. So in Rwanda, when people were calling members of another tribe cockroaches, and I want to resist the left participating in it. So that's why I try and be Mr. Rogers about it when I remember, and say, okay, I'll keep love for people and remember to denounce bad ideas and bad actions. So I denounce the Trump administration's actions, and I denounce what I perceive as their underlying ideology and their underlying instincts for self-preservation and to avoid jail or legal consequences for crimes. But I don't wish death upon them, because I don't want to escalate that rhetoric, that genocidal death wish chicken race that people will get into, which, from my perspective, is initiated by that maliciousness of Fox News and Rupert Murdoch, who has put his viewers in harm's way whilst he takes self-protective measures. So most people probably know that Rupert Murdoch owns Fox News. He also owns 70% of print media in Australia, which is one of the reasons why Australia has such a significant and ongoing problem with racism. He took the racism that we had here already and he's exacerbated it. The same in America. Racism isn't an invention of Murdoch. It's just something that Rupert Murdoch has capitalized on and amplified, leading red state voters to possibly embrace the idea that Trump would preferentially favor them and deprive blue state voters of resources, because otherwise how would it not be a political scandal that would lead to his immediate ousting, that Trump is making remarks that he is withholding resources from governors who don't adequately flatter him. Yes.
Yeah,
so yes, what did you say?
I don't know trying to think how to put this. I don't know, like you were saying, it's like they're wishing death upon people. And I mean, as a nurse, I wouldn't wish death upon anybody. I mean, even Trump, and I can't stand him.
Yes, good.
I don't want him to die. I don't wish that somebody is going to go and kill him, or that he's going to contract the disease and die a horrible death. No, that's not something, as a healthcare professional, I don't wish that on anybody. I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy. I don't wish that on Trump. But it's like they are wishing this on people. It's like they're pushing it. Okay, well, if we can hold back some supplies for an extra couple weeks in New York until we get enough heat that okay, we have to look like we cave. Oh, here you go. Here's a couple ventilators. Here's a couple gowns and some gloves.
Yeah.
And then it looks like to some people, especially to his base, that, oh, look, he's helping everybody. He's sending them supplies now. When the need was 2 weeks ago, when the need was a month ago, when the need for testing started back in January, when we were offered other tests that other countries were already using, and we refused.
The WHO test that they offered to distribute, but that the CDC rejected. Mm-hmm. And we still haven't got the paper trail of what drove the CDC rejection of those tests during that really critical time period for America, where having those tests and being able to identify and isolate infected people would have stopped or done so much to minimize the spread of this disease. I want to introduce people to an analogy I saw that I think is valuable for understanding exponential growth. That if you and a speedboat are at the starting line and a speedboat takes off and you try to swim after it, your ability to catch that speedboat is the same as watching a graph rise exponentially. So that speedboat isn't just beating you, it's outpacing you at an increasing rate. Does that make sense to you, Brian? Does that analogy resonate with you as it did with me when I read it? That a speedboat is just getting faster and faster as it pulls away from you. So chasing an epidemic or a pandemic, trying to contain it, becomes more difficult the longer that race has gone on. So you're not very far behind the speedboat to start with, but the more time elapses, the more difficult it is to catch up to that speedboat. And the same way it's more difficult to contain a pandemic, the more time passes and the more infections you're dealing with, because the growth rate, that speed of that speedboat has just taken off so fast.
Yeah, because at day one, had we jumped on the speedboat, we would be there. We're months behind the speedboat now. It's not even in sight.
Yeah. Yes. So now it does take the shutdowns, although most countries get to the point of needing to shut down at some point, depending on when their leadership recognizes that. But they would be reopening and preventing deaths from poverty is much easier if you've done more of that proactive work rather than that reactive work. So we always have to distinguish between the proactive actions that the Trump government could have taken. We know now that Trump was getting all of these briefings telling him how serious the virus was, and he chose to go out and lie to the public, bold-faced lie to the public and minimize the problem. Not only was he deceiving the public so that he was reducing compliance rates with any early suggestions of maybe cut down on the parties, people. He encouraged people to go on parties and travel with his speech. And he was also in the background failing to take action that America needed him to take then and there, i.e. replenish the stockpile, place more orders, issue directives to stop the sale or export or donation of supplies that America was going to need. And he had those intelligence reports. We know because his senators The Republican senators were busy selling their stock in retail stores and buying stock in online companies that facilitate doing business online, i.e. pandemic-friendly software companies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I haven't seen the comment section for ages because I accidentally maximized my screen, so I will try and fix this. There we go. Now I can see comments. Let's have a look. So somebody said that Trump's base might actually approve of Trump's withholding of essential medical equipment from blue states. Yes, I would agree with that. And as I was saying, I think that's a product of Fox News and Rush Hannity's cultivation of hatred and resentment. And I'll use the emotional equation of abortion, because the more they talk about abortion in terms of a Holocaust, and they use it in reference to everything, the more you can see they're whipping themselves up to yearn for the death of blue state voters, because they've been talking about us, particularly about women, but also any Democrats who support abortion and women's rights for bodily autonomy. They've been describing us as mass murderers for years. And the spread of that rhetoric is very facilitatory to genocide, to electing someone who could then get away with distributing resources to disfavor blue state citizens, blue state people who will die as a consequence of federal deficiencies in action and federal deficiencies of planning and other measures, that blue state people will die as a consequence of red state voters talking amongst themselves about how we are mass murdering babies. When if you look at it, countries that suddenly adopt anti-abortion legislation are countries that have seen a precipitous rise in the death rate of women. So we're not really murderers, and putting a condom in the bin isn't really murder. Contraception isn't murder. The Romanian dictator, Nicholas, I don't know how to pronounce his name, Nicholas something, the dictator of Romania, banned contraception and banned abortion at the same time. And orphanages filled up. And when his reign was brought to an end and people could actually begin to investigate, there were buildings upon buildings, institutions found with stick-thin, emaciated children. And the death rate for women had risen significantly. So that's just what I'd like to say about that I try not to let all of the anti-abortion rhetoric I see on the internet go unanswered, just because I see that rhetoric as being so deadly in terms of what it's cultivating. It's cultivating a murderous level of hatred for Democrats amongst Republican voters.
Yeah, and that's been one of the arguments here in the United States forever, is that Democrats are baby killers.
Yes.
And that's how the Republicans have framed it for as long as I can remember, for as long as I've been alive, probably, because most Democrats are pro women's rights, as I am myself. But they want to demonize it. They want to use these harsh words to make it sound like Democrats are monsters because they want this.
Yes.
It's not about who's right, who's wrong. It's not your choice to make somebody else's choice. And that's the way I look at it.
Okay, make sure you share with each other, darling. That's just a toy banana baby.
Not everybody, just because you can get an abortion doesn't mean somebody's going to. Not everybody wants an abortion. There are people that want their children. There are people that want huge families. I have 4 kids myself, which is atypical in the United States anymore. But and myself and my wife, probably, even if we had another, if my wife got pregnant again, that's not a choice that we would make. I mean, that's our personal choice.
Exactly. It's personal choice is nice, and I don't mind Republicans talking about abortion in a way that to turn the tide in terms of cultural embrace of abortion. I don't mind them saying we can encourage women to believe they could have a choice. They shouldn't feel compelled to have an abortion. So I'm happy to try and negotiate to reach a middle ground more, instead of this we've already used the word demonizing, so I'm trying to think of something else. This false characterization of Democrats as baby killers, because we're seeing now that stigmatization, because that rhetoric doesn't exist in isolation. It has real political consequences that are leading to death right now, not of babies, not of fetuses, not of unborn children, but the death of real people, real cherished family members with developed personalities and sentience that are dying because of the Electoral College giving rural voters and red state voters disproportionate power over all Americans, and punishing blue states through this irregular distribution of resources, punishing blue state voters for having the audacity to believe that women could choose to limit their family sizes. And I saw an article from a physician, an American physician working in Israel. And in Israel, apparently, they have even more permissive legislation in relation to abortion. And this pro-choice physician was becoming uneasy at how much women were still being encouraged to get abortions even in the third trimester. She was almost longing a little bit for some more of that American drama around the subject. So it's more of a contentious decision to make to get an abortion in the third trimester. And I can see that because my education in child development would lead me to believe that, yes, to a degree, unborn children in the third trimester are capable of learning and feeling pain. They learn the differences between various speech sounds they hear. They can distinguish when they come out of their womb between the mother's voice. They respond differentially to different people, their mother relative to other people. So there is evidence to say that we can ascribe some characteristics of humanity to unborn children. But at the same time, to people who say, no, unborn children should have equivalent rights to women, I will say an unborn child can threaten the life of its mother. And if you give it legal equivalence to an adult woman, then women don't get treatment for diseases. Like full-grown, sentient, conscious women may lose their lives because doctors can legally refuse to treat them for cancer. Or, such as the case in Ireland, a woman called Dr. Savita Halapanova, she died because her baby was miscarrying, but it hadn't completed the miscarriage. There was still a detectable fetal heartbeat. And when they told her there was a low chance that her baby would survive, she asked for a termination because she already didn't feel well. And the sepsis, the infection that her unborn baby had, was putting her own life in danger. So she and her own husband asked for a termination. That was recorded, but medical professionals just said they were going to monitor to her instead, and they inadequately monitored her. They disregarded the fact that her heart rate was going up, and she died of a heart attack secondary to sepsis from this infection from her dying unborn child. And that caused a huge
story very well.
Yes, that caused a huge revolution in Ireland in terms of turning the tide of public opinion sufficiently so that when they had a referendum on the topic of choice around abortion rights, they allowed abortion became legally permissible in Ireland, because they could then see it clarified for them the need to change the culture so that unborn children didn't have rights equivalent to the mother, because even though that sounds fair, it's not. Unborn children are still contained within a mother. So if you give them equivalent legal rights, you are potentially jeopardizing the lives of women. And they shouldn't be placed on equal legal footing if you want women to live.
Yeah. And back to like the like people dying of COVID and things like that. Another thing that a lot of hospitals, and most all hospitals that I'm aware of, have instituted a no visitor policy. Absolutely no visitors.
Yep.
Except in extreme circumstances where a loved one may be dying, but they can't be COVID positive. So you
can be in the hospital, one person to be in the hospital for the death of a relative who is not COVID positive, who is dying of something else.
That is the current policy in my facility and my facility's system. We have had COVID deaths, and we were talking about this, me and some of the other nurses, that it's heartbreaking that somebody dies alone.
Yes.
Because of this disease process. because of how dangerous it is and how infectious it is. And it takes a toll on us as nurses and the doctors as well, because normally when we know that a patient is impendingly dying, the first thing we do is we get on the phone with the family and say, hey, something is going wrong. Can you get here? Can somebody get here? And a lot of times that gives them peace when they get there and they see their loved one die in front of them in a peaceful manner. But then these people are passing away with nobody there, with nobody in the room, nobody holding their hand as they're dying. And
no comfort
for the
final
family
moments
too.
Yeah.
It's hard for the family too, because they're not getting the closure, and we were talking about how emotionally hard is that for the family to live with that guilt, and it's making me tear up at this moment, because we were all very emotional just talking about that the other day. That it's sad, and it's something that we never even fathomed as healthcare professionals, because no matter what the disease process was that somebody was going through, we always were able to protect the people that are going in the room. We just don't have enough data on this particular disease right now to even protect ourselves, much less the lives of other people and family members.
Imagine if you had an abundance of hazmat suits. Imagine if Trump had been so on the ball with this that he'd enacted the Defense Production Act in January and produced and turned all American manufacturers to making hazmat suits. If people during the shutdown were changed from their jobs to going into secure facilities and using social distancing, participating in the manufacture of hazmat gowns. Imagine that even if there was then a minimized number of people with the condition, and you could wear a suit and go in and say goodbye and hold the hand of a loved one during their passing moments. And just imagine that case scenario. Imagine President Joe Biden or President Hillary Clinton or President Obama looking after the people of America. And now just knowing that Democrats are having to fight Republicans to get funding for hospitals and to get funding given directly to those in most need. The Prime Minister of Australia, who's effectively a mini Trump, who's an evangelical Christian who ascribes to that sort of prosperity gospel, which usually sees people who are less wealthy as non-deserving of help. He's changed his tune as of today, and he's saying it's not a matter of entitlement anymore, it's a matter of need, because now there are so many people in need that he's starting to say we really have to go above and beyond in terms of financial help offered by the government. But to me, it sounds like Republican ideologues are still so lost to that idea of don't help, don't give, that they're still haggling over the idea of giving to Americans who need it. They still don't have models that include consumer demand as a big part of the engine of the American economy. They don't understand that if you keep money out of the hands of people who urgently need it, that they may die, they may become so deprived of food that they just pass away in their own homes. Republicans just seem to think that the best thing to do in this scenario is buy guns or continue to allow guns to be sold as an essential service. But my heart goes out to the people whose family members are dying alone, maybe even intubated, which many people describe as being an incredibly unpleasant experience. And just to imagine what it could have been like with hazmat suits produced for everybody so that there could even be visitors in those final moments.
One thing that my health system has done is typically somebody that comes in with a respiratory issue, there are different levels of oxygenation. And we spoke about this last time, the positive pressure ventilation that we have, yes. Which is what they call BiPAP or heated high flow, OptiFlow. We are essentially bypassing those. If you come in and you're short of breath and we think that you are going downhill, we are immediately putting somebody on a ventilator. We are immediately intubating them because it so significantly lowers the risk for the healthcare providers that have to go in and out of that room.
You're not distributing, you're not aerosolizing the virus through the positive pressure machines. You're going straight to intubation because that just recirculates the air that the patient's breathing out.
Exactly. And the only time that, and sometimes the connections can come loose, they pop loose, or you bump into something and the circuit gets broken for a certain amount of time. Now you've aerosolized the room again. But we take measures to prevent that stuff from happening as much as possible. There are times when the circuit does have to be broken for maintenance purposes by the respiratory therapist to change out these filters that they use. So those are times when, after that happens, we coordinate with respiratory that everybody stays out of the room for an hour. If there is a dire emergency, that's the only time we are able to go in before that hour has expired.
Yep. Wow. I'm noticing in the comment section that somebody is saying they were intubated for 6 days, and they say that in capital letters, which I imagine is a reflection on how they felt about that being intubated is not a pleasant experience. Someone is asking you if you've doubled up on the ventilator for 2 patients. Is that happening yet? Are you converting
my hospital, our layout for our rooms is not congruent to putting 2 beds in one room because they're all private rooms in my hospital. We couldn't physically fit 2 patients in a room with the ventilator and everything else
small required
for care.
For care. Someone else is asking if we've seen the new respirator hoods being made. What are the respirator hoods? Are those?
It goes over top of the head. Looks like a glass dome or a acrylic dome,
Yes.
and it kind of seals around the neck to kind of create a sealed positive pressure ventilation type system. I have not seen those in use. I don't know of anybody that I know of personally that has seen those in use yet. We're still using intubation and traditional methods of ventilation right now.
Yes. Yeah, because it's a mom and pop outlet or something that are producing those. I just saw a headline saying mom and pop thing. Well, that's going to be a small scale production level. You're not going to see that broadly across America yet. But they put that in news stories to give people something to get excited about. But that sounds quite small scale. Unless people could amp up the production, or mom and pop could sell or license their product to other people for production, then maybe you could see more of them. But yeah, hypothetical at this stage. Critter 1667 is saying worst days of her life, or his or her life, being intubated for 6 days.
I can imagine that, having spoken with patients that have been intubated and then extubated. It's not a comfortable process. It is not it's not something that you'd wish on anybody. But I have heard stories of patients that come in. A respiratory therapist told me a story of a patient that would come in routinely for COPD exacerbation. She'd just lay back on the table and open her mouth and say, "Tube me," and then she'd crochet while she's sitting here intubated for 2 days at a time, and then she would get better and she'd go home. But I would say for 99% of the people, it's not that way. It really isn't. It's a traumatic experience.
Yeah.
And I can't imagine having to go through it myself.
I've been intubated once. I had 4 wisdom teeth removed at once under a general anesthetic. And when I came out and I was still intubated, came out of anesthetic and I was still intubated, I thought I couldn't breathe. I guess the feeling of obstruction in my throat made me think that I was not getting any oxygen, and I was still sufficiently out of it that I couldn't lift my hand to my mouth to point, "Hello, medical staff, I can't breathe." But I wanted to communicate so I was just like pointing a finger towards my mouth from where my hand was way down, like that's in the direction of my face. And the surgeon saw my gestures and my facial expressions, I guess. And he said, "Oh, I think she's feeling worried." And he held my hand. And I remember thinking, "Oh, I know I'm paying quite a lot of money for for his surgery, but that's nice that I get this bonus of him holding my hand to help me come out of my anxiety-related breathing difficulties, because I thought the intubation was stopping me from breathing. Yeah. Somebody says catheter hurts more than the breathing tube. I guess depends on how it's put in, but yeah, catheters are not supposed to be pleasant.
I'm assuming Foley catheter is what they're talking about, because I've heard that's not very pleasant either.
What are they?
Foley catheter goes into the bladder to empty the bladder.
Oh, yes. I haven't had that. Yeah, that sounds not pleasant.
Yeah.
Enlighten Up is saying that, no, they have scaled up production. I'm sure they have scaled up production of those hood respirators, but I'm still saying that even like a small family production company, even if they're scaling up production, that's just not something that's going to be as widely available as ventilators that are already in existence and being bought and sold and put around and distributed around the country yet. So we're not going to see broad scale adoption of the hooded ventilators yet at a scale that will be meaningful in a country as populous as the United States. That's just my understanding of that.
Yeah. Back to something we're speaking to earlier about Trump and the lockdowns and stuff like that. This just popped in my head again. I watched part of his press conference today begrudgingly, because I typically don't like to watch him on TV.
Yeah.
But I saw him talking about the fact that one of the reporters asked him, certain states are putting in lockdowns. Why haven't you called for a lockdown from the federal government? And his response was basically, oh, well, that's the state's problem, or that's up to the state's decision. We don't want, basically he's saying we don't want to cramp the style of the states. Let the governors make those decisions. He said, if Alaska doesn't need to shut down, then why would we shut down Alaska? So he's pushing the blame or pushing the responsibility away from himself and the federal government to do these shutdowns. He's saying, oh, well, I'm washing my hands of it and I'm not doing it.
He's making the measures become more reactive than proactive. If he was being influenced by people enough to take proactive measures, then he wouldn't wait for there to be a problem in Alaska. He would make a federal shutdown to prevent there from becoming a problem in Alaska. Because as we know, in relation to exponential growth, all the measures you take to slow things at the beginning are far more effective than trying to catch up to a speedboat that's got a 3 seconds head start on you. Much easier to catch up to the speedboat earlier. So I'm going to try and focus my energies and not to just shake my fist at Trump, but to say, look at this product of libertarian thinking that says, oh, well, just the states. Federal government shouldn't be used because federal government action is something that should be done away with. Trump is a product of voters thinking that that's a good approach. Too many, a critical mass of people voting for a man who evinces an attitude like that. Yes, Pumpkin? Oh, yes. Can you go ask your daddy? And I'll come and help too. You deserve lunch. You're right. It's definitely time for my children to have lunch now. So let's see. I'll leave it there with saying, I hope the perils of libertarian thinking, everything is on a continuum, and historically people swing to and from different ends of a continuum of belief. And it's not just influenced by circumstances, it's also influenced by opinion shapers who move or push people towards one end of the continuum over the other. So too many of us have been shepherded by libertarian thinkers towards this disbelief in federal government action. But now circumstances have reared their ugly head to point out the fallacy, inaccuracies, and murderously negligent deficiencies of those type of thoughts that say federal action is bad. The federal government is well placed to take proactive and therefore incredibly effective action. And that's what's been missing from the American response, is effective federal action, as well as state governors who have been more compliant with Trump's idea of the virus, i.e. not taking it seriously. Pumpkin, you're going to lose a stick if you do that. Go ask your father. He can start the process of getting you lunch and I'll come finish it. Okay? Daddy can also make food. He's not on the phone and he's a very capable human being. Somebody has a question for us, but I just wanted to finish off my sentence by saying, yes, understanding the perils of libertarian thinking will hopefully swing people away from that critical mass of endorsing republicanism, that idea that you should make federal government so small you can drown it in a bathtub. That was somebody with an odd name, Norquist, Grover Norquist, somebody with a peculiar name who's an influential Republican. All right, sweetheart, if you don't go and ask your father, there's going to be a consequence. Okay, you sort yourself out. How can the president talk cures on TV? That's what doctors are for. No, that's also what snake oil salesmen are for, and that's what Trump is, and that's what libertarian is. I once heard someone describe libertarianism as astrology for men. It's a type of wishful thinking engagement with the world. It's a pathway to knowledge that's ephemeral and imaginary, pretending that government is inherently flawed. Government is not inherently flawed. Sometimes governments are very flawed. To look at a communist government and say, see, the excesses of that, or the problems with communist dictatorial rule, are the problems with all government, and all government is inherently malignant and authoritarian. That's that overinvestment in freedom. I would like to write an article called The American Delusion of Freedom, just about how all these trade-offs have been made from over-adoption of the idea of freedom as being the principal value of America. Because, yes, American capitalism has benefited from the freedom to pursue industry, but it's also benefited from the freedom for migrants to move to the country. And we're now at this critical impasse where migrant hostility towards migrants, where inherent racism from some people who've never grown out of it, has now combined with that over-attachment to freedom to produce this scenario, this nightmare scenario for Americans. And I want to help write that down to help with that framing, because when you help people with their thinking, it helps them when they can understand the world. You make the world plausible to them in a way that's persuasive, in a way that works, that fits all the facts as they can see them. It won't work for Fox News viewers, but it'll work for people who are undecided, who still think, oh yeah, maybe libertarianism is just in the middle. People will come to know that libertarianism is a version of extremism that needs to be opposed as stoutly as communism.
Yeah, exactly. And about your quote, or about your comment, Critter, about the guy that died over the fish tank cleaner, chloroquine phosphate is actually a medicine used to treat malaria. It was something that they had, in small studies, were trying to see if maybe this would work. But the chloroquine phosphate you buy to clean your fish tank is not medical grade.
It's the same active ingredient, but not medical grade. Yes.
Yeah, and it's going to have all sorts of impurities and everything else in it, and you can't just drink it. You can't just drink medication and think, or chemical and think it's going to work as a medication. But when the president
medicine to the same active ingredient in fish tank cleaner and presume, but they were clearly so caught up in Trump's snake oil enthusiasm for chloroquine phosphate that they just thought they could protect themselves, and their fear was at such a level that they lost rationality and perspective.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a sad situation that he has that much sway over somebody, that somebody would think to drink fish tank cleaner.
All right, I'm going to go make some lunch. It was lovely to talk to you again, Brian. I invite you back on anytime. We should talk about what kind of hashtags we can use to let people know that I have an upcoming interview scheduled with you, but at the same time, given demands of family and your profession as well, I'm happy to be flexible about it, and we don't have to give people much notice. I can just say, today, interview with healthcare professional. Again, you're a great foil to talk to. Thank you for your great listening skills and your thoughtful and well-informed contributions. I love that you are keeping an eye on things as well, and are so well-informed of developments in your country. And I'm brave enough to do
best. It changes by the minute.
Changes by the minute, exactly. There's such a volume of news and such a volume of information. That might be one factor in the rise of disinformation, in that people's potential feelings of overwhelm have sometimes led them to turn to the simplistic answers provided by charlatans such as Trump and a lot of Republicans. But we're here to have a factor.
Historically, people have turned to the president for guidance and for that simple answer.
Yes.
And unfortunately, it's Trump in that position right now.
Yes. Why is it so hard? We'll talk about this next time. I'll think about this and then return to it another day. Why is it so hard to hold Republicans to account? Why do people hold Democrats to account so much more readily for any errors or missteps? And yet Republicans are given so much benefit of the doubt, and their outrage, their confected outrage, is allowed to become a headline so much more readily than the real headlines, or real scandals, real outrages perpetrated by the Republican president. So that's an issue I'm going to think about. What is it in the cultural makeup of the media or the public or both that makes the Democrats held to such a higher standard than Republicans? I think it's because of American favoring of business interests, and Republicans have the reputation of being aligned with pro-economic policy, even though I think reality doesn't reflect that, and Republican governments have typically raised the deficit and got America into a lot of economic trouble. I think they've still paid a more effective lip service to it, and maybe because they're also allied with religion more strongly than Democratic presidents are currently allied with religion. So maybe that's where some of the benefits.
I think that has a lot to do with it. I think the religious zealots, they scream the loudest from the rooftops, and it makes the biggest noise. Whereas Democrats, they don't typically scream from the rooftops when it's something going down. I mean, we were with the whole impeachment thing with Trump and trying to get a fair trial, which the Republicans just squashed. That's a whole nother ball of wax.
Well, yes.
It's I think volume. It's the volume of the voice that's out there pushing against Republicans or Democrats. The volume against Democrats has always been higher.
Yes. Maybe Democrats are more authentically committed to public good. So they sound more wonky and more pretentious and like they're talking about how to get things done, but in a way that's not always accessible to everybody.
Yeah.
So maybe people always don't understand the efforts of Democrats, whereas Republicans are more devoted to the optics of telling people, we represent you, we're looking after you. And because they're more focused on the optics than
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. But I was going to say, and I think part of it is Republicans are typically white collar crimes that most people don't understand. They don't understand what a white collar crime essentially is, or why it's even a bad thing. Oh, they did insider trading. Oh, big deal. What's wrong with that? Because they don't understand the implications of it. They don't understand the ramifications of the corruption that really is about.
So so that can be a goal, to amplify the general public's engagement with white collar crime as being something that is as damaging to people's interests as your more standard property theft. All right, pumpkins, okay. I will go. Selling stocks before this. Yes. Thank you so much again, and hope to talk to you again soon.
Yes, we will do this again.
Someone asked Brian if you've yet had to triage the use of ventilator therapy. It sounds like no, not yet for your hospital, Brian.
No, not yet. Not yet. We have not had to do that yet.
That's probably more of a New York thing at the present moment. But
yeah, we have not reached that point at my facility, but we're in Florida and we're a couple weeks behind, several weeks behind New York.
Yeah, so talk to you again. We'll get an update before several weeks have passed, and we'll monitor the situation. Thanks again for appearing with me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Lovely to talk to you as always. Thanks everyone for listening. Take care of yourselves.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good evening.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye.